So what was the point of all of that then? So in regards to Dragon Ball Super Superhero, whether you liked it or not, it was certainly something quite bold and very brave of Toei Animation to even give it a go. A brand new way of making animation that would be cheaper to make, quicker to make, and something that's keeping up with the times and CGI quality improving by the day. I mean, let's not forget the really ropey CGI in Resurrection F, and we got this now 7 years later in Superhero. Not bad at all. However, it might not have actually been any of those things, and that's according to one of Superhero's producers. Please enjoy what I am about to show you, and why I think this might be once again, after many years, yet another one of Toei's follies. Let's read. So this article comes from Bounding Into Comics, and it reads, Dragon Ball Super Superhero staff revealed production team was unhappy with decision to animate films solely using 3D CGI. The original interview came from Shueisha Online from December 23rd when Hayashida was talking to publications there. But the way that they frame it is actually kind of a good interesting thing between US articles and Japanese ones, because the opposition is read here as there was a lot of opposition to the adoption of 3D expressions within Toei Animation. I know I'm using Google Translate, but it gives you the gist. But there were several people in the upper management who said, try it, as in, go on. Oh, us execs, just do it anyway. And therefore, in June 2014, which is interesting, they made a pilot version to kind of test the concept. Hence what the results of that might have been put into Resurrection F. Interesting. And then in 2016, they tried again with the Dragon Ball Room, and then Toriyama met it up, and they made 4 pilot films, checked it, and then they got the go-ahead. And the pilot eventually became what was Dragon Ball Super Superhero. So this has been in the works for a very long time, so like nearly a decade, effectively. But this is the article in particular, which it actually then deciphers both parts of the interview, and I find it very intriguing. So here we are. The past decade has seen the executives at Toei Animation make a number of questionable business decisions regarding their properties. You don't need to tell me that, mate. It obviously talks about Senseiya, and it seems the company's resulting production woes have finally started to affect arguably their biggest franchise, Dragon Ball. Arguably. I would definitely see One Piece is up there, especially locally. Word of the trouble being caused by the franchise's burgeoning reliance on 3D animation in its cinematic outings, as seen briefly during Gogeta and Broly's final fight in Dragon Ball Super Broly, and throughout the entirety of Superhero. I will say that the guy who's writing this article is definitely not a fan of 3D animation. In my opinion, I thought that Superhero carried itself off really well. When you compare it to Resurrection F from 2015 and to now, that you can make a movie and make it look quite competent, and Gamma 2's death scene, wow, that's incredible. It does look really, really good. And I can understand why it might be a good idea to move toward it if you want to have uniformity in terms of the style, so you don't have inconsistencies like we had with Dragon Ball Super in the early days. So maybe this is what Toei's trying to do, so you get consistency. But then again, you kind of lose some charm of original animators, but they do corrections, but that's besides the point. So according to Hayashida, not only were the costs to produce Superhero in 3D so high that it have actually been more cost effective to animate everything in 2D, but also that most of the staff at Toei Animation were wholly against the film being animated solely via computer graphics. So this is interesting. So again, this is definitely a contrast to what you see in the Japanese article, where they don't really want to go into detail about the animosity regarding certain decisions. So you definitely have this comparison and contrast. The people who work on the ground at Toei, the animators in particular, don't want to do everything in 3D because they lose some of their own personal touches to it, and it's not something that they're familiar with. And then the upper boss just go,
I'll do it anyway.
And Toei is definitely pushing to do more and more stuff with 3D, because they did that with Dragon Quest Dai, they're doing it in bits and pieces with One Piece, and they're definitely doing it all entirely with Superhero, because I will say as a devil's advocate, yes, the initial outlay for Superhero may have been high in terms of cost of making the models and whatnot, and taking quite a long time, but this is something that could be made cheaper in the future, because obviously they have the models, they have the backgrounds, etc, etc, etc. Things might be a little bit more efficient later on, but right now the initial costs don't really justify it, and it's now only, I think, taken over in terms of Broly's takings, at least locally, but either way. Then this goes obviously into what Chikashi Kabuto was saying, which has been said about the last couple of weeks, that he only came on board due to the fact that he got to animate a 2-minute sequence, that prologue sequence of Superhero, himself. That guy did it all by himself, and it's incredible. To some, that was the best bit entirely in terms of what Dragon Ball Super Superhero offered, and it actually did renovate and modernize the Dragon Ball style in a very good way. I'd love to see an anime done at least a fraction to that ability and look. It's great. And he revealed that despite the animators being unionized and the company operating in the black, things behind the scenes weren't perfectly tied up with a bright red ribbon. I see what they did there. The article, red ribbon, I get it. That was really good. But what this paragraph sort of infers is that, yeah, the animators were unionized and they could have easily said, no, we don't want to do it this way. We'd rather do it in 2D. It's more cost effective. And the company was doing okay. I mean, Toei makes a lot of money, but obviously things behind the scenes weren't really doing great, like we saw with Super at the beginning. So quite clearly, management issues are still prevalent. So continuing, Kubota explained that one of his conditions for signing on Superhero is that Toei Animation allow for some 2D animated sequence to be featured in the movie, which in turn resulted in the beautiful remastered recap of relevant events from Dragon Ball. As per a live tweet provided by French anime and manga news website mangaanimation.net, already I like this website because it cites its sources, so that's good. Kubota first detailed how, like the Toei Animation staff members referenced by Hayashida, he also believed that it was a shame that Superhero was completely 3D, particularly as he feels 2D illustrations lend themselves more easily to create expressive animations. Although I will say the 3D models were actually pretty good for what they got in the end. But that can also be attributed to 2D corrections drawn over the 3D models, so that's something to take into equations here. However, after playfully noting that he already told the aforementioned Hayashida that he should call him if Toei ever gave the green light for a full-on Dragon Ball remake, the animation director then admitted that because he had to animate the entire sequence himself and check all the 3D animations one by one, the recap's inclusion led to him regularly cutting it close on his deadline. So, deadlines still being an issue here. The whole thing about the early beginnings of Superhero is that the deadlines were ridiculous. They announced Superhero in April, they put it out in June and July. 2 months. You don't do that. You should usually do 6 months. So, this is something I found really interesting. Ultimately, Kubota asserted that thanks to the Toei Animation going all in on 3D animation, Superhero took a year and a half to produce, additionally noting that the first and last episodes of One Punch Man's first seasons, on which he likewise serves as the series animation director, took a comparatively shorter time of 6 months and 6 weeks to respectively produce. So the first episode took 6 months because obviously you want to make sure you get all the styles and workflows together, and then the final episode took 6 weeks. So by the time you get to the end of season 1, you've got everything down pat, you've got everything sorted, it takes you 6 weeks. So even then, something like that, all of that production could just take you less time. So in terms of this article, what it's saying is that 3D Superhero was more expensive to make and it took more time. And it was not something that the actual animation staff really held in high regard. And Kubota was only involved because he managed to strong arm using his own reputation to do that beginning sequence, which people loved. And surely that would be an indicator that this is something you should be doing. This is something that you really should be doing, Toei. But no, this is something that they want to do so they can make the models and then just run off into the sunset and never have to use those modelers again, or maybe get some slight tweaks done on the cheap, trying to save money even though Toei doesn't really need to. So this article is really intriguing. I find it really fascinating. The fact that there was a lot of dissent in terms of actually making Superhero 3D, and that it could have easily been 2D had the animators unionized and got their way. But essentially what the higher-ups at Toei were doing were going, go on. Are you sure you don't want to? Oh, go on. Go on. Again, this is just something I'm thinking is definitely a folly of Toei. This is something that could easily have been done in 2D. It didn't have to be done in 3D. It's not like they were struggling or trying to find ways to save money. In fact, they spent more money and really didn't get as much of a return in terms of what Broly did. That movie cost only $10, not $10, $10 million, sorry. It cost $10 million to produce that movie, and they made their return 12x. That's easy to do. I remember we got the announcement of a Dragon Ball movie in January 2018, and it came out about 11 months later. We were getting previews of it like 6 months later. And with Superhero, we got lead-in times about roughly the same, but they hadn't really done anything, and they were behind deadlines. And then, of course, we had in April, there were delays because of the Toei hacks. But I still find the original article here really interesting because it does sort of gloss over those little things. It's like, yeah, there was a little bit of smattering of opposition, but we got past that, and we started to work on it. It was fine, it was okay. People came around to it in the end, whereas this article just went straight into it. So I find it really intriguing the way that the West and the East, they kind of view those kind of disruptions, as it were. But let me know what you think in the comments, folks, and whether you find this actually something that surprises you, or if it doesn't. But if you want to check out what my thoughts on Superhero were to begin with, check out this video here.